Well, good evening, everyone. Have you ever felt weary of waiting for something? Have you ever felt that sense of weariness of waiting for something? You're waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting. It never comes. It never arrives. The thing you're waiting for never comes. A couple of weeks ago, our son Joe decided that he wanted to sell his Toyota Yaris. He wants to get rid of it. He just doesn't need the car anymore. Between them, they've got one car, and so he and his girlfriend can just use the one. They don't need two cars, so they're trying to sell one. And he put it on Facebook Marketplace. And as he put it on Facebook Marketplace, this guy from Leeds sent a message down and said, "I'll come and buy it. I'll come and buy it." But there was something about his offer that made Joe doubt it. Something about the fact that he was coming all the way from Leeds for a Toyota Yaris made him doubt it. But even so, they arranged last Saturday that the guy was going to come down and Joe was going to be in all day waiting for this guy to turn up. There was something in Joe's mind that said, I don't think this guy's going to turn up. I really don't think, and even if he does turn up, I think he's going to offer me about half the amount of money for my car that I've put it on for. And all day he waited and waited and waited. The guy didn't turn up at all that whole day. And he got really weary of waiting. And I think that's an experience that we can have. I'm waiting just to see if, there we go. It's an experience that we can have in life as well. That actually we can be weary of waiting for things on this earth, but actually as followers of Jesus, we can sometimes grow weary of waiting for God to turn up. We're waiting for the second coming. Yes, we all want it. We all want the second coming to happen now. But actually, it's tiring waiting. It's hard work waiting when you have to go through illness and sickness and all the things that this world throws at you. But actually, it can be really wearisome waiting and waiting and waiting. And sometimes that can lead us to actually doubt that God can do what he said he's going to do. And sometimes it can lead us to think that either he won't do it, God won't come back again, or actually he can't do it. And if we look deep into our hearts, then actually I think we can be honest enough to think that actually do we live our lives sometimes with those questions or sometimes with those thoughts in our minds? Do we actually live expecting Jesus to come back again in power and glory to sweep us all up into heaven? Or do we just get weary of life? Do we just get weary of what's going on? Well, I think that this passage that we've got this evening from Isaiah chapter 40 is one that I think will really help us with this. Because what we'll see is that in amongst all of this waiting, that actually weary waiting people are strengthened by the good news of God's faithfulness and greatness. That we as people can be strengthened through God's word, this passage, and the rest of God's word as well, to wait and be strengthened, knowing that our God is faithful to his promises and he has absolutely got the ability to deliver on them. Absolutely got the ability. And the reason we're looking at this and the reason why it's in Isaiah is that these people have got to a point where they are starting to doubt. We've been looking at this prophecy that Isaiah has given to the southern kingdom of Judah. And actually they might be starting to doubt what's going on. We're going to pick up on some of these themes as the different invading armies are sort of coming into the horizon for that nation. The Assyrians were on their doorstep. In the future, the Babylonians were potentially going to be coming in as well. And actually, we can sometimes feel that the weight of this world is so much that it is just too difficult. There are two themes that start in this chapter of Isaiah 40 that we'll see sort of expanded on as we go through the rest of Isaiah. And those themes are, will God rescue us? And can and then how will he do it? And we pick those both up in this chapter now, in chapter 40. So let's go to our first point for this evening. So our first point for this evening is from verses 1 to 11, God's promise of deliverance. And as Becky said that she prayed that actually as a preaching group, we've been looking at this as a group of guys on a Saturday morning, looking at these different chapters from Isaiah. And actually there are a number of different lenses that you need to look through every bit that Isaiah brings to us. You need to look at it in terms of what was happening with the Assyrian invasion that was going on, but also prophecy is also looking forward to when Jesus comes, and further, it's looking forward to us and our time today as well. That's what prophecy normally does. In Isaiah, you've got another fourth dimension, that actually, as well as the Assyrian invasion, Isaiah's also talking about a Babylonian invasion that's going to take place in about 100 years' time. So you've got all these four different lenses to look at as we read through this chapter. And actually, if we tried to do that, if we tried to do every verse looking through those four lenses, we'd probably be here for about 2 or 3 hours, because there is just so much to pick up from there. So I apologize that when I look at some of these verses, the particular lens that looks right for me and looks the most powerful for that particular verse is probably the one that I'm going to use. But actually, if you wanted to go and reflect on Isaiah 40 yourselves, please do go and look with all of those four lenses at all of the richness that's here in this chapter. So let's have a look at chapter 40. Verses 1 and 2 are more or less the introduction to this. Comfort, comfort my people, says your God. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem and proclaim to her that her hard service has been completed, that her sin has been paid for, that she has received from the Lord's hand double for all her sins. The first lens we're looking at here is that Assyrian lens, the invasion that's just taken place by the Assyrians, who have wiped out the northern country of Israel, and they're now on the edges of Jerusalem in Judah. And actually they get defeated miraculously. You can look back through Isaiah into some of the previous chapters, and actually they get completely wiped out on the edge of Jerusalem. 185,000 troops are wiped out in one night by God's angel. 185,000. And so the Assyrians back off from Judah and leave them there. Comfort, comfort my people, says your God. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem and proclaim to her that her hard service, and that same word can be military service. In some versions you'll see warfare as the word in there. That her hard service has been completed, that her sin has been paid for, that she's received from the Lord's hand double for all her sins. That first lens is one you can look at, but actually the fourth lens of us today is a real comfort from these verses as well. That actually, when our fight is done, that actually we have comfort from our God. Comfort, comfort my people, says your God. Comfort, comfort my people. That's 2 verses in the introduction. 2 verses in the introduction. Verse 3 to 5 then gives us the first view of this promise of God that's going to be fulfilled. A voice of one calling in the wilderness. And I hope when you hear those words, you're hearing the Gospels. Because those are the same words that are picked up in the Gospels when they talk about, or John the Baptist is the one who is the voice calling in the wilderness. So you've got that third lens. You've got all these different lenses that we're looking at as we look at these verses. A voice of one calling in the wilderness, prepare the way for the Lord. And these verses talk about valleys being raised up and mountains being pushed down and roads being created and made level so that the King's victory march can take place. The glory of the Lord will be revealed and all the people will see it together. This is the God coming in victory. And again, for that first lens, for those guys at the time of the Assyrian invasion, they needed to know that actually it was God who delivered them. And for us, we know that these verses were spoken about when Jesus came. And actually that was our King here on earth. That was our King coming into this earth for us. The glory of the Lord will be revealed, and all people will see it together. What a great promise that is. Hundreds of years before Jesus was born. Well, what a great promise for us thousands of years on as well. Verses 6 to 8 then says, voice says, cry out. And I said, what shall I cry? All people are like grass, and their faithfulness is like the flowers of the field. The grass withers and the flowers fall because the breath of the Lord blows on them. Surely the people are grass. The grass withers and the flowers fall, but the word of our God endures forever. So we have the promise of the King coming. We've got the promise of his word, his promises enduring forever. Because actually these nations, Assyria, Babylon, whatever is going on in our lives today, they're like grass. They're like grass to our God. The word of our God is the only thing that endures forever, not any of these nations. There's no Assyrian Empire now. There's no Babylonian Empire now. They all pass away. They wither because the breath of the Lord blows on them. And again, those guys who were in captivity in Babylon needed to hear that actually the Babylonian Empire wasn't going to last forever. But don't we need to hear that whatever empire is ruling in our world today, whether that is a national empire or a commercial empire, it's the word of our God that will endure forever. The word of our God that will endure forever. Not Google, not Facebook, nothing else. 9 to 11 there says, you who bring good news to Zion, go up on a high mountain. You who bring good news to Jerusalem, lift up your voice with a shout. Lift it up and do not be afraid. Say to the towns of Judah, here is your God. See, the sovereign Lord comes with power, and he rules with a mighty arm. See, his reward is with him, and his recompense accompanies him. He tends his flock like a shepherd. He gathers the lambs in his arms and carries them close to his heart. He gently leads those that have young. This is the third promise in here of this good news that here is our God. Here is our God. And I hope that's good news for you today. It might not be. It might be that you are somebody who's not trusted in Jesus, who's not thought about him as your God, as your King, as the one who rules in your life. I would love to say to you that this is good news that you are here this evening, that you're listening to this good news that comes from Isaiah's lips through these words that are in our books through to you today. This is good news that you have somebody who wants to look after you, like a shepherd who would lay down his life for his flock. One who will carry you when you are too weary to walk. One that will gently lead you when that's what you need. Here is your God, is what those people in Jerusalem, those people in Judah were hearing. So we're going to pause at that point because actually there's more to see from verse 12 onwards, but we're going to pause for a minute or two just to discuss our first question of the evening. And I think hopefully what we see is that verses 1 to 11 wipe out that first thing, that he won't do it. Actually, there are loads of promises in God's word that says that he will. So the question then is, how can God's promise of deliverance strengthen you? So spend a minute or two looking at that, and then we'll come back to look at the rest of this chapter. So that was a very short time to discuss that first question. We've got another couple of questions at the end that I think might take us a bit longer to get through. But let's go on to the next part of Isaiah. So we've seen that first question of will God do it has been dealt with. He's promised he will. His word endures forever, and it is good news that our King is coming. That promise is certain. And that's what we see in that first part of Isaiah 40. But then as we moved into this second part, we see, can God do it? Does he have the ability to deliver us? And I love some of the imagery in here. Just read verse 12. Who has measured all the waters of the whole earth in the hollow of his hand? Who has done that? Or with the breadth of his hand has marked off the whole heavens? He's held all the dust of the earth in a basket. Weighed the mountains on scales and the hills in a balance. It's just mind-blowing, the imagery we have here. And immediately in those verses we see that it's just, how could we ever doubt that God can do this? How is there ever a shred of doubt that God can do this? It goes on to talk about the nations being like a drop of water in a bucket. There is nothing. And again, remember those first two lenses, those who were just faced the Assyrian invasion and were going to face Babylonian exile. They thought those superpowers were the most amazing things. Maybe Egypt as well might have come into that. Those nations are like a drop in a bucket. They're regarded as dust on a scales. They don't even tip the balance of God's scales because they're like a speck of dust. Verse 18 to 20 talks about setting up other things as idols, images, pictures of gods. How can you do that? It's impossible. And then in verses 21 to 24, it talks about the fact that he sits enthroned above the circle of the earth. He stretches out the heavens like a canopy and spreads them out like a tent to live in. In verse 25, to whom will you compare me? Or who is my equal? Says the Holy One. Just lift your eyes up and look to the heavens. Who created all these, all the stars? He brings out the starry host one by one and calls forth each one of them by name. And because of his great power and mighty strength, not one of them is missing. Not one star in the billions and trillions and billions of stars is missing. God knows them by name. How could we ever doubt that our God can deliver us, can save us, is going to be coming again in power and might to recreate this earth into a new and perfect place? This is the God that we worship. This is the God that we follow. The rulers of this world are nothing compared to him. Everything is incomparable to him. So I think in those verses, if you were to read them, you would see that they just absolutely blot out that second bit as well. Can he do it? Sound a bit like Bob the Builder, but yes, he can. Yes, he can. So why are these verses really important to us? Well, I think they are important because when you look at the last few verses, they talk about how we might feel. They talk about how we might feel in everyday life, how the Judahites who were facing the Assyrians might have felt, how they might have felt when Israel was taken off into captivity in Babylon. They probably talk about how we feel today as well. It says, why do you complain, Jacob? Why do you say, Israel, my way is hidden from the Lord. My cause is disregarded by my God. Those verses are weary. They speak of a people who are weary and have lost hope. They think that they are beyond his compassion. Their cause is disregarded. They think they're beyond his compassion. My way is hidden from him. They think that they are beyond his power. They think that he won't do it because he doesn't have compassion, and he can't do it because he hasn't got the power. And this might be a cry that we cry out in sickness and in suffering and in ill health and in difficulties at college and with bullies at school. This might be something that we cry out, that actually I don't feel that God cares about me. I don't think that God's powerful enough to sort out my problems. But look at verse 28. Do you not know? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He will not grow tired or weary, and his understanding no one can fathom. He gives strength to the weary and increases the power of the weak. Even youths grow tired and weary, and young men stumble and fall. But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. If you are weary of waiting for God, read these verses. God strengthens us for the journey that he's put before us. God helps us in that. There was a quote in a book that I read in preparation for this by John Oswalt. To wait on God is not simply to mark time. Rather, it is to live in confident expectation of his action on our behalf. God hasn't forgotten you. We are not beyond his compassion. Our causes are not disregarded by him. The things that trouble us in life are not beyond his power. They're not hidden from him in any way imaginable. I'm hoping that as you've read these, you've seen that there is real comfort by contrasting the frailty of humanity and nations and empires with this divine power that we have from our Father in heaven. And of course, we know this most because of what his Son did for us. And we're not beyond his compassion because he sent his one and only Son to die on a cross for us. We're not beyond that compassion. In fact, we're so wrapped up in it that we can't get our heads around it. We're not beyond his power because of what Jesus did in defeating death and coming back to life. He's shown us beyond any measure just how much he loves us, just how much he will do what we need, and that he's got the power to do it. So I'm hoping that we can find purpose in our faith through that. That we can be reminded of our place in a larger, more meaningful reality than the ones that we perhaps see day by day. I hope that we can have the patience and the trust as really meaningful responses to the struggles and the difficulties that we have in life. Because we have a God who promises to deliver and has the absolute ability to do so. If you're weary, go and talk with him. Spend time with him. Read his word. Read this psalm again and again. And just bathe in the promises and the power of our God. We've got a couple more questions to look at before we go to our next part of our service this evening. So we'll just spend a couple of minutes looking at these. round our tables.